First of all, I didn't expect JRD Tata to call me, but when he did call me, he was apologizing to me for disturbing me on a Sunday, which is my time with my family.
And which has been your experience in turning around the plant at Navsari and the special place that Navsari holds in your heart?
Told us when we were felicitating on the NCPA launch, JRD Tata.
It is not very often that we meet someone who's worked as an executive assistant to Mr. JRD Tata, and that too for 2 years, and that too in when was that, sir? Mid 60s, mid 70s?
75 to 77, around that time.
Yes.
73
and,
to 77. Sorry, 75 to 77. 70.
All right. And whatever I have read on him is that he was a very meticulous person, a great sense of humor, a horrible temper, a people's person, and someone who could, take hard decisions as well as have a softer side. So I will be delighted to learn of your experience and certain anecdotes of working with Mr. JRD Tata for those 2 years as his executive assistant.
Well, Girish, I've written my experiences in the book, but for this particular conversation that we are having, I would like to mention once again that I didn't carry the hello title of executive assistant to JRD Tata. I functioned as one. So, minor correction, because I don't want people to think that I did carry the title of executive assistant to JRD Tata. I was executive assistant to Mr. Savawala, who was a part of JRD's office, which really exposed me to do work for JRD as well. So I was officially executive assistant to Mr. Savawala, unofficially executive assistant to JRD Tata.
So if I may ask, Mr. Savawala then was a vice chairman Tata Sons, am I right, sir?
Not vice chairman Tata Sons, vice chairman Tata Steel.
All right. And he was a director of Tata Sons?
Yes, very much so.
All right. Okay. So yes, sir, please continue.
Yeah. So as I was saying that working in that capacity, I had the opportunity to work for Mr. JRD Tata as well. And you mentioned, the name Tata in Gujarati is not, the real name Tata is not pronounced as T-A-T-A. It is Talwar Ta. For which you don't have the right alphabet, I think, in English. So they are Tata. The real name is Tata. But in English, it becomes Tata. And Tata means pepperish. Somebody who becomes angry quickly. I mean, that maybe that's why they had that name. And for 26 generations up to the founder, each one of them has been a priest in the Tata family. And Jamsetji's two sons, Gaurav and Ratan, were also ordained priests.
All right.
JRD Tata was the son of Jamsetji's cousin, another Ratan Tata, but he was popularly known as RD because Jamsetji's son was Ratan and another Ratan. So JRD's father was known as RD. And that's why JRD added the third alphabet D in his name. That was the ethical value of his personality, that he didn't want people to confuse him as the grandson of the founder through Jamsetji's son Ratan. But yes, as the son of his cousin, RD Tata. And imagine somebody wanting to be that clear about his identity for the sake of posterity, not misunderstanding him as the grandson of Jamsetji Tata. So that was the kind of person that JRD Tata was. It's impossible to sum up in a few minutes what JRD was like. But I must say that I didn't see him lose his temper very often. And that temper was very momentary, if at all it was there. It would evaporate in hardly a few seconds. I mean, it was never meant to hurt anybody. The only time it happened where he was very upset was on a cricket match, and I looked after the Tata Sports Club cricket team, and somebody had taken the team away because he didn't like the umpire's decision. And that's the time he was really livid. And he said, you have to win in a fair manner and lose in a fair manner. I have got that story in my book, so I won't repeat it. But values, transgressing values or violating the Tata principles was something that would really make him angry. But fortunately, Tatas didn't have people who would do that at that time. I'm sure they don't have them even today. But the value system was something that violation of that he would just not tolerate. Now, coming to personal experiences, small things, many of them, very small things. I learned from him, for example, humility was one of his great virtues. If I was a part of his office, if he had to phone me on a Sunday, which happened very rarely, I lived in a building called Steel House at Marine Drive, where the driver also lived. And JRD Tata would wanted the driver on a Sunday to meet him. He wanted to go somewhere, so he wanted the services of the chauffeur. So he phoned me, because in those days, you won't believe, in the whole building, we had just 2 phones, because phone connections were just not possible. And my phone I shared with another person in the same building. So the phone, when I picked up the phone, I was, first of all, I didn't expect JRD Tata to call me, but when he did call me, I knew the voice, it was so familiar to me. I said, yes, sir. He said, before saying what he wanted, for at least 1.5 to 2 minutes, he was apologizing to me for disturbing me on a Sunday, which is my time with my family. And it was becoming extremely embarrassing. I said, sir, just tell me what is it that I can do for you? You're not disturbing me. He said, can you please pass on a message to my chauffeur? His name was Babu, I still remember, and ask him to see me. I want to go somewhere. I said, that by all means, I'll do that. The driver and I would give an arm and a leg to be of service to JRD Tata. So I informed the chauffeur. And I'm sure JRD Tata apologized to the chauffeur as well for, disturbing him on a Sunday. So that was the kind of person that Mr. Tata was. Always considering about the feelings and the convenience of the other person. So this kind of humility, courtesy would be a better word in this case. Humility, I think the best example is his award of the Bharat Ratna. This is not a personal experience, but this is what Mr. Ratan Tata had shared with us when we were felicitating Mr. JRD Tata for being awarded the Bharat Ratna. The only businessman in India so far to have been awarded with that honor, as you know. So Mr. Tata told us, that is, Ratan Tata told us when we were felicitating on the NCPA lawns, JRD Tata, that when he heard, he was with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, and Narasimha Rao mentioned to him the award was being bestowed on JRD Tata. And he couldn't resist it, so he picked up the phone and informed Mr. Tata. And what was JRD's reaction? He said, good Lord, why me? Can you not do something to stop it? Imagine a man saying he didn't want the Bharat Ratna. So he said, Mr. Tata said, yes, what is it? I have just done my duty. Yes, I increased production in our company. Yes, I started the airlines. But so what? He was of that stature. Titles didn't matter to him. And then, of course, how he was persuaded, etc., is a very different story. But I think that signals a level of humility, I think, is supreme. It's at a pinnacle of humility. My favorite virtues are humility, kindness, and gratitude. And all 3 of them, he was a perfect embodiment of all those 3. So humility is something I learned. Courtesy, as I told you on my Sunday thing, he didn't have to apologize to me. Again, it's a combination of courtesy and humility. Ethics with a nation was something which was supreme to him. Everything mattered to him was the country and ethics. He had sold, this is where I was involved, and that's why it's like a personal story. He had sold some property, and he had made some profit on that property. And he knew that capital gains or whatever tax would be required to be paid, he would have to make that payment. So he asked me, he said, get Mr. Palkhiwala, because there was no greater expert than Mr. Palkhiwala on taxation. And he just sat opposite JRD's room, which was his office. So I told him, because I was familiar with what was happening on the fourth floor in Bombay also. I said, sir, Mr. Palkhiwala is not in town. He's traveling. But can I get for giving you some advice, Dinesh Vyas. And Dinesh Vyas at that time had the reputation of being Chota Palkhiwala. He was called Chota Palkhiwala. He had that reputation. Of course, Dinesh knew Mr. Palkhiwala. He had his own independent practice. Yes, he said, get him. So I requested Dinesh, and we called him Dinesh Bhai because that is a way of respecting a person. So I said, Dinesh Bhai, Mr. Tata. Dinesh Bhai was very thrilled. He said, oh, Mr. Tata wants some advice. So he came to meet Mr. Tata. And he did some calculations on a piece of paper. And he said, sir, you can make this, this is your tax liability and you can pay it. But you don't have to pay it immediately. This was sometime August, September, I forget the month. You can keep the money. You are required to pay the tax before the financial year ends on 31st March. So, which means that you can keep the money, earn some interest on it, and then pay tax on the interest and as well as the gains. And you can earn a little more. Mr. JRD Tata didn't look very pleased with that advice. I still remember, that face which was saying that not a good advice kind of thing. Now, Dinesh Bhai felt that he had to clarify why is Mr. Tata not happy, and to reassure him, he said, Mr. Tata, this is perfectly legal, because he thought JRD must be thinking there is some ethical violation in keeping the money, holding the money. So he said, this is perfectly legal. So Mr. Tata looked at Dinesh. He said, Dinesh, don't tell me whether it is legal or illegal. Just tell me if it is right or wrong. Now, he just looked at him because he didn't know how to answer it. Dinesh didn't know how to answer it. So JRD said, see, if I can pay the tax now, I don't know what they will do with it. However small the amount may be, will it not come in handy for the country earlier than 31st March? Now, Dinesh Bhai was totally stumped. He didn't know what to say. He just stood up, thank you, he said, and shook his hand. And when he came out, he said, how does one advise a man like JRD Tata? He thinks so differently. So ethics and nation for him was priority. It made a lot of difference to Mr. Tata. So there were many things.
That is such a heartwarming example, sir.
Yeah.
Very rarely do we meet such people who, even in the smallest of matters, that whatever that party amount of tax was in the overall scheme of things of government of India,
Right.
but for a man to think of it in that way and to then go ahead and not only think about it, but to go ahead and execute it, speaks volumes about the man. And you indeed are blessed, sir, to have worked with him so very closely.
Indeed.
And sir,
Indeed.
and sir, now if I may take you to another aspect of your journey, and which has been your experience in turning around the plant at Navsari and the special place that Navsari holds in your heart and your own contribution overall to the plant at Navsari.
Well, Girish, as I said, in 1983, Tata Steel took over the operations in Navsari. And I was keen that somehow Navsari should turn around. And I'll tell you why I was so keen to do that. And I kept making many suggestions, as I said earlier. And all those suggestions were, not necessarily welcomed, and because I was neither a metallurgist nor an engineer. What fascinated me and attracted me to Navsari, and Tata Steel took over the operations in 1983 at Navsari, and they deputed two seniors from Jamshedpur who ran plants which are bigger than Navsari was in different fields. One was a boss of roll turning shop, and the other person had already rolled narrow hot roll strips. So here it was cold roll, but that was hot roll strips, which is raw material for cold roll. So they invited two people from these two, and not invited, they nominated these two officers at different times. Mr. Dev Prakash came first and Mr. Gad came later. it improved matters, but nowhere near turning around that company. And Tata Steel had guaranteed a certain amount, 35 lakhs of rupees a month, to just keep it afloat, which meant that if Tata Steel if the plant generated 17 lakhs, 10 lakhs, the balance would be made good by Tata Steel. So Tata Steel had put in almost 4 crores over the years in Tata Metals. Sorry, it was called a metals division. I called it Tata Metals later when I created it as a separate company. But at that time, this was called the metals division. My suggestions, though not sort of completely turned down, but never followed. And one day when nothing much was happening, Jamshed Irani, who passed away recently, and Mr. Sabawala was sitting in their office, and I was called to meet them. And I had a feeling that it has something to do with Navsari. So they said, you've been making many suggestions. Nothing much is happening in Navsari. Would you like to take charge of the division? And if nothing happens with you also, we just forget the money that we have spent in reviving. You just come back. They may close the division. The textile company may close the division. To myself, I said, that's the question I'm waiting for. Can I take charge of the company? In those 2 years, I knew the plant. I knew the plant people. I had made many friends, right from the union leaders. And I was totally committed to Navsari. The reason was that I was very passionate about Navsari. It was the birthplace of the founder, Jamshedji Tata. And I felt that it is not acceptable that a Tata unit is languishing in the birthplace of the founder. That was the only statement that I carried in my mind. It was very, very important for me that it was like a insult that how can a Tata company make losses in the birthplace of the founder? It was just simple as that. So that passion was driving me, and in the 2 years that I had been there, I'd been to his birthplace many times. It was where he was born. It's a 6 feet by 6 feet room, just 36 square feet, the seed of a $100 billion plus empire today. So that is what sort of triggered that passion in me. And that's why I start that chapter, The Miracle Workers, by Gandhi's line, where he says, achievement is possible only when emotions run ahead of reason. And reason said, this unit may not be worth continuing with, and passion said, I won't allow it to languish. I won't allow it to make a loss. And that's how that I joined that company or that division. Shall I say, lit the same fire in the hearts and minds of 640 plus of us in the 2 plants that we had. I've given a detailed, shall I say, account of that story in my book. And within less than 12 months, we had turned around the company. So completely. So I don't want to take you into what all we did, but it also taught me things which I later implemented in the other 2 companies that I was able to lead. The 5 questions that I always asked myself, and they came in very handy to run other companies. The first one was, what was it that I would do if I was to set up this company or this plant again? And if I know what I am supposed to do, why am I not doing it? So that was one. The second was, what is it that I would not do if I was to set up this plant or company again? And if I know what I would not do, why am I continuing to do it? That was the second question. So it gave me answers to what I should do and what I should not do in Navsari. The third question was, so what? If you're faced with a crisis, either you allow the crisis to take you over or you do something about the crisis. So we knew what we were faced with in both plants, later in Tata SSS in India. And the question I asked myself privately, I didn't mention these questions to others, but this is how I used to tackle myself while dealing with difficult situations. The third was, so what? And the fourth was, why not? Which meant that if I knew what I should do, why can I not do it? That gave me the courage, and I was able to allow people to experiment, to innovate. Why not? So long as we are doing it. And finally, and most importantly, is this the Tata way? the question, is this the Tata way, kept me and my companies and the people I worked with always pointing north when it came to values and corporate governance. So anything that we did had to have that Tata way element, because more than anything else, we felt, or I felt, that as an employee of the group, my primary responsibility is not just making a company successful. It has to be successful in the Tata way. And my primary responsibility is to safeguard the reputation that Tata enjoys even today. So that's very briefly my story, Girish.
Right, sir. Thank you so very much. Thank you for speaking about the Tata way. Our episode 2 of Tata Katha season 3 will be on the Tata way by Mr. Donn Doongaji, where we review his brilliant book, Tata Living by Values. Thank you so much, Mr. Doongaji, and see you in the next episode.